Today, we had an incredible conversation with Humphrey Chin, founder of CLIPr. Through his journey with CLIPr, Humphrey learned how to redefine what success looked like in identifying product market fit. And then through that effort, he was able to pivot who his ideal customer was, and it was off to the races. Tune in to hear Humphrey's story.
This is the Startup Junkies podcast.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Startup Junkies podcast. Thank you for tuning in, however and from wherever you're tuning in. We're very grateful for you today, or grateful for you for tuning in today. I'm joined by new co-host, Kendall, a senior intern extraordinaire at Startup Junkie. Kendall, thank you for joining us today on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful first day of spring here in Northwest Arkansas. And we are joined by our friend Humphrey Chin of CLIPr. Humphrey, how's it going?
All right, really good.
We're excited to have you on. Fresh off the airplane and back into Northwest Arkansas. For those that don't know, tell us, what is CLIPr? Let's get the elevator pitch out of the gate.
Yeah, so at CLIPr, we literally automatically generate the first draft of the police report so that we can cut in half the time required for a police officer to document. So today, an officer on average spends half their time documenting. And our goal is to basically cut that in half so that they can spend 75% of their time patrolling and fighting crime and only 25% stuck behind their desk documenting.
And that's documenting through the body cam footage? Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. And so tell us a little bit about, so that's the elevator pitch on CLIPr. Tell us the Humphrey story. How did this come to be?
Yeah. So, I think when we originally started CLIPr, we were actually focused on helping people define the most important moments inside of any recorded video. And that meant for students, for event attendees, and for enterprise employees. That was born during the pandemic. And, that's like literally already 4.5 years ago. And as you know, the world's relationship to video has evolved quite a bit. And so because we were pandemic opportunistic, we were actually serving a moving target. And so the real turning point for CLIPr was at towards the middle of 2023. I got accepted into the Fuel Accelerator program backed by the Walton family, which basically led to me spending 10 weeks here in beautiful Northwest Arkansas in Bentonville. And Demo Day, which is where everyone gets on stage, all the CEOs, for the 10 CEOs that were part of the Fuel AI ML cohort, we presented on stage and we gave our pitch. And normally the goal is to have the 100 to 200 attendees, who are the who's who of everyone in the region, evaluate and figure out whether they want to collaborate or use that startup's technology. And in CLIPr's case, I happened to have the lucky opportunity to have Corporal Quentin Reinhardt, who was the police officer on duty from the Bentonville Police Department, hear the pitch and then come up to me afterwards and say, the police needs CLIPr. And so that literally began our shift and focus into public safety. And so when I asked, Corporal Reinhardt, hey, so how can we get this into Bentonville Police Department? And, he was candid. He's like, hey, I'm just a peon, so you're going to have to work with the captain and the chief. And so by around Christmas time, because this was like in October of 2023, I was able to meet with Chief Shasted and at the time Captain Hubbard and, learned what they needed. And that's when we started to understand opportunities around Freedom of Information Act, redaction, and then reporting. And so we ended up doing 2 pilots, initially around Freedom of Information Act. And then when we ended up building the automated creation of the first draft of the police report, we launched that in June of 2024. And then at that point, when we did the pilot, we learned what we needed to improve. And one of the things that we really realized was, unless it was completely seamless or completely automatic, where the officer didn't need to do anything, it wasn't going to have good adoption. And so that's when we actually partnered with the first body-worn camera manufacturer with iPro. And we designed what we call dock and auto upload. And so what that means is the officer just does what they normally do. They dock their body-worn camera at the end of their shift. We automatically receive the video, and then we process it, and then we generate the first draft of the report.
So that kind of created like a pivot point for y'all in terms of who that ideal customer was. I'm assuming y'all were targeting more kind of corporate customers for, maybe recorded board meetings or client, client meetings, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think like now we all take for granted like Otter and Fireflies and Zoom IQ, all these tools, which now everyone uses all the time, and that we classify that as like everyday video. And the thing that CLIPr was very much focused on was like really useful moments inside a video. And so what we ended up learning is that the majority of video that's being recorded has like a really, really short shelf life. If it has a really short shelf life, you use it once, no one ever goes back to it ever again, which means the vast majority of recorded video is actually disposable. And what we ended up discovering was that where CLIPr has its biggest impact is if the video has high referential utility, which means it has ongoing value and people will actually go back to it and refer to it. And it turns out that with body-worn camera video, it's actually legal evidence to help, protect or prosecute the offender, and so it's legal evidence, and so it actually has really high referential utility. And those two words you probably haven't really heard them together before, but it took us a while to figure that out. And I think one thing that ends up being really important in a startup's life, and when you're in pre-seed or you're in seed and you're getting to Series A, the goal in seed, which is where we've been, is to get market fit. And we knew we had market fit in this use case when we started pitching the capability for CLIPr to police departments. Literally every conversation went to pricing immediately, and they were then trying to figure out how to get the money to pay for CLIPr. And so that shows like high value,
sold on
right?
that, yeah.
So like this is not a situation where you're solving or you've created a solution and you're looking for a problem. That's like, unfortunately, a lot of startups fall into that kind of camp. And in our case, this problem already exists, and we happen to find a solution that actually solves for it. And when you think about a police officer, when they sign up to protect and serve, the documentation is just like a necessary part of the job.
A frustrating necessary.
Yeah, it's like a necessary evil. It's not their personal passion to document it, right? Can you imagine if every day you had to basically document every single thing you did? It's like reliving it twice. But for an officer, like they literally have to like document everything they just did. And when they document it, it actually can take longer than actually experiencing it. I mean, like a DUI can be like a 2-hour interaction. And now you have to like write up all that stuff. And so it is one of those things where it is solving a real problem, and it actually is offloading it, and it's actually doing a better job. And so we've heard from chiefs that the CLIPr generated police reports, if you were to academically grade it, it would be an A. So not only is it more thorough, more comprehensive, and more precise, it's actually easier to understand and clear and crisp. And so I've heard of police departments licensing Grammarly to help police officers document better, and that might improve grammar and make it instead of a C plus. But it's hard to make a C paper an A paper. And so in this case, like it's actually a perfect application for AI.
It really doesn't improve their memory of a situation either, right? I mean, a human memory is so fragile. I don't know how you'd best describe that. And I feel like obviously they've got the body cam footage, but in I can't imagine every scenario they're actually combing through individually prior to CLIPr and using that footage to actually create their police reports. A lot of that is probably being done based on memory.
And then classically skimming and skipping the video. So the majority of body-worn camera video is still not searchable. When it gets CLIPr'd, it's searchable. And that means that anything that's been said literally becomes searchable text that lets you jump right to it. And that's actually the part where Corporal Reinhardt, said, "Oh, I would love it if my video was searchable," right? And so that's actually how it kind of ended up being kind of the natural stepping stone. Make the video searchable. But then we realized, oh, well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more. And when we were focused on Freedom of Information Act stuff, it was actually focused on efficiencies for the records department. And so in the case of Bentonville Police Department, there's five records department people, but there's 100 officers. So think about the efficiencies for 5 people versus the efficiencies for 100 people. And so that's what kind of eventually led us to focus on automated police report generation.
And not to get too technical, but where does CLIPr's AI integration come into play in terms of transitioning that visualization of the body cam footage into the report?
Yeah, so we actually totally focus on the audio.
Okay.
And we use the audio as the source of truth because anything that the officer says or the offender or the witness or the victim, they're actually saying what they're seeing. And so that ends up being the source of truth. And so if there ever ends up being an inconsistency with what's being said versus what actually happened, that's when the DA's office is going to evaluate what they've seen on the video to determine whether the action was taken that was appropriate or inappropriate. And so like you can just imagine if an officer said, "Hey, put your hands up," and then later on says, "I've told you 3 times now to put your hands up and you still have not put your hands up." That means the officer is seeing that he has not put his hands up. So we don't actually need to use computer vision to actually see whether the hands were up or not. It doesn't actually add any value for us to say, perpetrator raised their hands. It's come on, the officer already knew that. And so our goal is simply to recap what happened. And that's actually what a police report's job is. Tell it like it is. And in fact, avoid bias or judgment. And at that point, if it's right or wrong, and when something is blurry, then that's when someone has to decide whether the action was appropriate or inappropriate.
And those are probably outlier situations, not necessarily, it's so much activity that can just be streamlined in the process. As you're, given that this is kind of the target market now, and you've found a way to integrate that directly with the provider of the hardware, does that open up new opportunities for you based on kind of their reach in the market? And what does that look like? How is that an opportunity?
Yeah, so even though we initially partnered with iPro, which is basically, previously they were a wholly owned subsidiary of Panasonic. So Panasonic makes the leading tough book, right? So patrol cars, most of them use Panasonic tough books. But CLIPr actually supports all the body-worn camera platforms because all of them are recording. And the way that we've designed our integration is to receive a copy of the video as it's getting uploaded into their DEMS, digital evidence management system. We also get a copy, and then we process that copy. So at that point, as long as we can receive it, then we can process it. So it actually ends up being an extra copy of the video. And then at that point, we sync up with the normal policies and retention policies of what the police department wants. They can actually hold on to ours and use it if they want for detective purposes. But for now, it's actually an extra copy. It's not the primary copy. And so at that point, the architecture is designed to work for everybody.
And does that create an opportunity even then to potentially work or partner with or identify a customer within the companies that provide that software or the hardware for that? Is that
and I think the way that we've our go-to-market, in order for it to scale, it's a lot easier for us to be a feature of someone else's technology because they already are selling to that customer and they already have a relationship with the customer. And so let's say there's like about 10 different body-worn camera manufacturers. If all of them were to use CLIPr, they could upsell our capabilities into their installed base. And that's a lot easier than a cold call from us. Because a lot of these sales are actually relationship based. And so if someone has retired from that police department, they already know everybody. And everyone who is at that police department already trusts them and will take a call and is happy to buy something from them. But a complete stranger, it's a little harder. And so the value proposition is one thing, but if there's a value prop and the relationship, then it's even better. But for us, we've been focused on just making the solution better, making it faster, and making it cheaper. And so at that point, it becomes a no-brainer for someone to want it because they clearly need it. But if you add in the relationship component, then it ends up being even easier.
Easier the better.
Are you an entrepreneur or an aspiring entrepreneur looking to get plugged into the ecosystem? We host a ton of events designed for education, inspiration, and collaboration, from weekly meetups to quarterly events like pitch competitions and annual events like our marquee event, the Startup Crawl, which is the largest startup party in Arkansas. Check out our event page on our website, sign up, and we'll see you there.
I have a question. Is there any like common complications or nuances that come with, an AI-backed company that you may commonly experience, at CLIPr when dealing with some of these body cam footage or et cetera?
A lot of people will end up asking like how accurate is our AI, and I think the AI is really focused around transcription accuracy. So we have about 90 to 95% accuracy, and so and in general, like if a native speaker can actually understand it, then CLIPr can also understand it. If you have a hard time understanding it, then we also have a hard time understanding it. So if you can't understand it, like we're not going to be able to figure it out for you. And so I think where the accuracy rates go down ends up being non-native English speaking speakers. So in that case, like let's say you're French American and English is your second language, then at that point the accuracy level could be 70 or 60%. But that's also because it's their second language. So they don't know English as well as a native speaker, which means articles and are like left out, right? And so at that point, it just doesn't sound like complete sentences. And so, but that just means that it would be harder for you to understand, but it's also harder for us to understand. But we're literally transcribing exactly what's been spoken. But where there could be misinterpretation is if the words are not put together correctly. But then that also means that the officer would also probably be confused if something was spoken incorrectly.
I know a lot of native English speakers that I struggle to understand half the time too. So.
Well, and I remember in the police department when we were actually doing tests and we had initial footage that we were going through, they're like, let's check out his body cam because he's got the worst accent. And they were like, and we actually put it on the screen and they're like, CLIPr got it. CLIPr got it. And so, a Southern accent, we can do it.
It's possible. I heard
Boston accent, Brooklyn accent, like those, they're not even considered actual accents. But out of the 32 languages that we do understand, 7 of them are actually variations of English, right? Indian English, Scottish English. And so there are countries where the accent is pronounced enough that it actually ends up being its own variation of English. But America just has English. Or we actually there's British English and then American English.
We don't have to use,
and the main difference with the British English is the spelling. Like there's a lot of words that have an S instead of a Z, right? And so, but those are just semantics.
Aluminum versus aluminium. So Humphrey, what's winning look like in the next 5 years, next 3 years, next 5 years? What does winning look like for you specifically with CLIPr?
Yeah. So 5 years. I mean, right now the turning point is closing our Series A. So right now, when you close your Series A, it means you've demonstrated scalable repeatability, and then it allows you to kind of break out from the pack. And so for us, once you have the A down, then the revenue and the run rate keeps going up, and then you do the B and you do the C, and then ideally we end up having a public offering at some point. Because one thing that's also become clear for CLIPr is that even though we were originally a very horizontal platform, we ended up verticalizing in public safety. Now, we've also recently expanded to include serving social workers, which is another flavor of... Bless you.
Thank you.
There's another flavor of public safety. But we've also recently expanded to include field-based site surveys. And so really now CLIPr is focused on documentation. So anybody who needs things documented, CLIPr can actually help that to be done in a fraction of the normal time, have it done with higher accuracy and with less effort and lower cost. And so we went from horizontal to vertical, but now it's basically the documented motion. Whereas before it was finding the key moment, and now we're basically helping you to document. But I think for us, the goal and success basically looks like us having a big impact around the fact that anybody who needs to document starts to realize that if they record and narrate, CLIPr can actually reduce the level of effort required and allow them to get the work done in a fraction of the time. And so we want to have as many people using our technology and benefiting from it, and then having them realize, or having them reach the point where they're all wondering, like, what would we have done without CLIPr? And so, we want that emotion where people just can't imagine how they were living life without CLIPr. And that's part of the reason why we named it as a verb, because we do want it to just be like, hey, let's just CLIPr it. And so its meaning has evolved, but now it's basically kind of a documentation motion.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit more about scalability. So you talked about how it won't necessarily just be police departments, rather when you've been doing this customer discovery in different public safety sectors, is there any other areas of opportunity in public safety that, CLIPr can dive into? I think that you just mentioned another one besides police department, but anything else during your customer discovery you noticed?
So in social work, so in the United States, there's 700,000 police officers. There's also about 700,000 social workers. And they also spend about half their time documenting. Now, the big difference in the social work area is that they currently are not recording anything. And so there we're competing with pen and paper. So I met with 9 of those states out of the 50. And they, confess that they're normally 2 decades behind law enforcement in terms of technology adoption.
I can imagine.
But out of the 50 states, I already have a couple that are interested in piloting CLIPr.
Nice.
And so they didn't know this was possible. And now that they do, it's
oh wow, we need this.
yeah. And so I think for us, it's just kind of in general, I'm an early adopter. And I think, there's that famous saying around the future's already here. It's just unevenly distributed. And so that's kind of a situation where, they're both business to government opportunities, but they're doing similar things. And the most severe or stricter forms of social work end up being evidence that goes to the police departments anyway. And so they realize hey, if we're already doing this for police, then we can do that for their most secure and the less secure stuff. And so at that point, it just ends up being change management. And so at that point, a pilot with the state ends up looking like, hey, just teaching their employees to start using their smartphone to begin recording every day, or start wearing a lighter version of a body-worn camera. And so at that point, it's just transferring one capability from from law enforcement to social work. And then the documentation motion also applies to insurance. So in the insurance world, there's adjusters that are going out and they're making assessment. And then, like LA, like people are going out there. It's a lot easier to figure out the damage when there's nothing there, but that's like an extreme situation. But in most cases, it's just figuring out water damage but then there's also home inspections. Like there's a lot of jobs just focused on documentation. And so we're basically looking for those partners at the ISV level, as well as system integrators that end up wanting to use us as an ingredient within their platform to realize extra efficiencies that they didn't know were possible before.
Yeah. And it seems like a lot of those things are relatively easy switches to be able to, integrate CLIPr into. It's just a matter of like bringing that awareness of stuff like that.
Yeah. And the nice thing about this is like what we're doing is so easy to understand. It's not, it's not
to teach them.
It's not a complicated thing, right?
Yeah.
And not, like you can just imagine if it's something complicated, then you have even higher hurdle for adoption.
Right.
But the fact that our pitch can be done in like seconds makes it so much easier. So at this point, we're just focused very much on early adopters because this is it is a new category. And while there is competition, it's really kind of finding those early adopters who are happy to like embrace early and then have the followers model themselves after those initial early adopters.
That's a good point.
So Bentonville Police Department ends up being our first police department, which they have about 100 officers, but 91% of the 18,000 police departments in the United States are 100 officers or lower. So the majority of police departments are actually representative of Bentonville. And then we've been working on the big whale accounts from the major cities. And those, even though they end up being a single digit or fractional percent of the police departments across the whole country, that ends up totaling up to being about half of all the police officers in the whole country, right? So like, NYPD has like 36,000 officers, which is like 2/3 of Bentonville.
Right. That's wild.
Well, in the interest of time, I will ask, our typical land the plane question to kind of get to know you a little more as we kind of wrap up here, Humphrey. We always ask our guests to kind of take their crystal ball, go back in time, or their time machine, not crystal ball, go back in time to a younger Humphrey. With all the accumulated knowledge that you have now, what advice might you give your younger self?
Yeah, so I think like I'm an optimist, and so I've always looked at the bright side of things. And for me, what I didn't realize when I was younger is that when you have a good meeting, like you're thinking, "Wow, mission accomplished," but because people in general are polite to each other, like even if they didn't like it, they're not going to tell you they didn't like it. Right. And so a long time ago, I worked at Verizon and Verizon Wireless, more than a decade ago. And whenever I was bringing in new technologies and having folks evaluate it and try to get the leadership to adopt it, I realized that the majority of the meetings were actually awesome meetings. But that didn't matter because if there was no action taken after the meeting, it actually was a failure. And so if you just look at stuff and go, hey, did you feel good coming out of the meeting? And therefore that was a great meeting? No, that's actually not correct. And so it's easy to fool yourself into thinking that things are great. And so like I would have told my younger self to actually read those tea leaves much more accurately, which would have made me realize that I was failing more than I thought. And so like, if you're an optimist, you actually have a blind spot because you're always looking at the bright side of things, right? For someone who's a pessimist, they're always looking at the negative side of things. But if you're too much of an optimist and you're always thinking that it's always going to work out, there are situations where it can actually like, blow back on you. And so that also basically delays your ability to find market fit. If you're getting if you're not getting the feedback you want, the fact that people aren't calling you back, that's actually saying that it's actually not important enough. And so having a startup realize that, you actually need to fail faster. And so part of failing faster is realizing that you're failing even though things look and feel okay. And so I would tell my younger self to, and that's why I would tell my younger self that I needed to be more realistic about like exactly where it's at, as opposed to being in my own, optimistic bubble.
Reevaluating those indicators of success and trajectory, I guess.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned that story around, having customers say, "Oh my God, how much is it?"
Yeah,
and let me figure out how to get the money for this. Like that's a very clear signal.
Right.
Whereas the CLIPr before that, be like, wow, you're going to help me find important moments? That's awesome. We'll get back to you.
Yeah.
Crickets.
Yeah.
Crickets. And you'll be like, hey, what do you think? Nothing, right? Yeah, so they're not telling you that like, hey, this isn't important enough, but their actions are basically telling you it's not important enough. And so like, I think to distill it down even further, like words are easy, but actions are really what you need to read into. So the lack of action is what you really need to understand in order to like be realistic about what's really happening.
Well, we appreciate you for joining us today. I know we caught you from the airport to an important meeting. And so I appreciate you making the time to sit down and join us. For those that are interested in learning more about CLIPr, that want to reach out to you or to the company, how might they reach you?
Yep. Go to CLIPr.ai and schedule a demo and prioritize the pilot.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to share with a friend. Subscribe and review because it matters to us and we want to hear from you. If you're interested in learning how to work with us, check out the information below. See you next week.